Before beginning, I want to thank Ian Nicholas Keynes, the editor of Theosophy Forward magazine, as well as the team of the European School of Theosophy for their work and support. We are continuing our interview series for 2021. Remember, the shortest distance between two people is a story. Getting to know someone makes life beautiful, and we always have something new to learn. Today, we are honored with a distinguished guest, Dr. Barbara Hebert. She currently serves as president of the Theosophical Society in America, a third-generation theosophist. Barbara has been involved in local, regional, and national offices throughout her years of membership. In addition to her years of service with the Theosophical Society, she has been a mental health practitioner and educator for many years. Barbara, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. It is such an honor to have the opportunity to be here with you and with all of you who are watching. So thank you for the invitation very much.
It's an honor to us also to have you here. Barbara, you belong to a third generation of theosophists. Could you share with us how your family was involved with the Theosophical Society? Also, how it is to grow in such a family. For instance, in terms of education, what are the theosophical ideas and values your family passed on to you?
Absolutely. My grandmother was the first member of the Theosophical Society. She joined the Theosophical Society in the mid-1930s. In a small town in the southern part of the United States, which is in itself pretty miraculous. Many of her children joined the Theosophical Society as well as her grandchildren. When she joined the society, she served the society in many ways. She had a large house, and when lecturers for the Theosophical Society, both national and international, traveled in the United States. At that time, they were mostly traveling by automobile. So they would take a stop, a rest stop, for several days, up to a week, at her home. And she would take care of them and make sure that they were well fed with good vegetarian food and had an opportunity to rest. So as a grandchild, I had the opportunity to meet many of these lecturers and leaders of the Theosophical Society, but we were always, as children, kept a little bit distant so that they could get their rest and we were not causing too much noise. I think my grandmother taught us, for the most part, about kindness and compassion. And she taught us on a daily basis in little things. As children do, we might run past a bush and pull off some leaves, and she would stop us and say, that hurts the tree, that hurts the bush. Don't do that. And then when we would question her, she would explain that all life has consciousness. And so we learned bit by bit along those ways. She taught us also about brotherhood and sisterhood and the unity of all life. She taught us acceptance of all religious and spiritual traditions. It was just part of the way that we grew up. It was a wonderful way to grow up. But I do think that every individual who is born into a theosophical family and is raised there must eventually make theosophy their own instead of just the way the family believed. It needs to come from the person themselves. They need to look at it as if it were any other tradition and sort of analyze it and see it in their own way. didn't change what my grandmother taught us, but it did help me as I waded through it on my own in my early 20s to make it my own. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it answer, and I couldn't agree more that, I think it's very important because growing up and learning something, we have eventually to try to make that what we have learned a living force in our lives. And that's making Theosophy our own. I think this is what you meant.
Yes.
Could you, Barbara, tell us, name someone in the Theosophical movement that inspired you and explain why. I'm not talking, of course, about the great names, Blavatsky, William Judge, and so on. Someone you actually met, and have had an influence on you, on your way of thinking.
Of course. It is so hard to choose just one person. There are so many theosophists who have had an impact on my life. And for a variety of reasons. Primarily, the impact of individuals for me was watching them make huge efforts to live the Theosophical teachings, to actually live them, not just read them or study them or talk about them, but to actually live them. And of course, as human beings, we all fail at times. We falter, we stumble, but to watch them get back up and to continue to do their best to live these teachings. I think they also influenced me strongly in their incredible dedication to serve humanity. That is really the crux of why we belong to the Theosophical Society, that we are here to do the work of serving humanity and helping to expand the consciousness of humanity. In terms of people, I think of Joy Mills, Virginia Hansen, Anne Green, Eunice and Felix Layton, Jeffrey Hodson, Dora Kuntz, Rada Bernier. There's so many, and those are ones who have passed. And then there are others who are still working in this physical world. Tim Boyd, of course, we know, and Mary Jo Kokachak, a member in Michigan, Maria Parison. Again, I hate to name names because there are so many. Perhaps the person that impacted me the most really was my grandmother. Lois Burns was her name. She's been on the other side for quite a while now. But I often think about her and wonder what her response would be to some of the questions with which I'm faced on occasion. I'll tell you a story about Joy Mills. Briefly, I hope that's okay. When it became clear that I was going to hold the position of president of the Theosophical Society in America, I was a bit overwhelmed at that responsibility, as you can imagine. And so I wrote to Joy and I said, you have held this position. You've been the General Secretary in Australia. You've been the International Vice President. You have worked all of your life for the Theosophical Society. Can you give me any guidance, anything that would help me as I prepare for this role? And I got a letter back. The letter actually arrived in my mailbox the day before I found out that Joy had passed away. But her letter and this is to paraphrase because Joy was extremely articulate both in speaking and writing. But the message that she gave to me was, get over yourself. This is not about you at all. Keep your mind focused on the work, and what will need to happen will happen. So again, influence from so many people, and I'm so grateful.
Yes, I think that the words of Joy Mills, they are really wise, because it's not about us. It's not. It's about carry on a work that has started in the 19th century, and bringing it into the modern world with new challenges, with new ways of thinking, and moving forward. So. But yes, thank you so much for sharing, and I understand your difficulty naming names because there are so many names that, it's difficult really to name all of them. And Barbara, could you please tell us what impact Theosophy had in your life? Also, in your professional work, you work with mental health, and certainly Theosophy had an impact also in the way that you approach your work, your clients, and all that.
Absolutely. I'm going to just add one touch onto the previous question that I had forgotten to mention. In the last day or so, I was talking with someone, and they said, we stand on the shoulders of giants here in the Theosophical Society. And that is so true. They were humans, so they made mistakes. They were fallible, of course, but they were giants. And because of what they did, the paths that they cleared for us, we stand on their shoulders to be able to clear more paths. So again, always immense gratitude to those who have come before and to those who were working alongside us to continue to clear paths for those who will come after. The impact of Theosophy on my life, I don't think I can overstate it. It is who I am. It is who I am. It has totally shaped my perspective on life in this physical world. It's provided answers to my questions. It has made me who I am. And I think that the reason that I was able to do the mental health counseling for so long, and I think I did it pretty well, was because of my Theosophical teachings. They provided a framework for working with my clients. So for many years, my expertise was in working with children, and particularly children where there were allegations of abuse of some sort, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. That was the population that I worked with primarily. And people would say to me, how can you work with this population? How can you work with a 4-year-old who's been sexually abused and be able to go sleep at night? And I really believe that it's because of my Theosophical teachings, because of the explanations that are given, that there is a rhyme and a reason to this world, that it's not chaotic, that each of us is on our own journey. And I believe strongly that we have been a part of choosing that journey, a journey that will provide us with the necessary opportunities for growth so that we can move forward. It also allowed me to separate myself to some degree from the clients with whom I worked. Well, I always had tremendous empathy for the clients with whom I worked. I didn't identify with their journey. I recognized and realized that it was their journey. And I also recognized that it was a huge privilege and honor for me to be able to walk with them for a little while in their journey. My journey was separate from theirs, or is separate from theirs. So I think these are lessons that helped me tremendously when I worked with young counselors, teaching them and mentoring them. We would meet and they would say, oh, this terrible thing happened with my client last week, or my client told me about this terrible thing. And I would say to them, so what does your tradition, religious or spiritual, what does it say to you about why bad things happen to good people? And we'd talk that through. I didn't bring my theosophical beliefs into it because it wasn't about me. This was about the journey of the counselor. And if they didn't have an answer, I would encourage them to search their tradition for an answer. And if they couldn't find one, to search other traditions. Because having that answer to why terrible things happen to innocent, kind, caring people all over the world, all of the time, having an answer to that, an explanation, makes all the difference in the world. So my theosophical background has meant everything to me. It has helped me get over my own obstacles, the obstacles in my own journey, of which, of course, there are many, as there are with all of us. Few, if any of us, get through this physical life without having difficulties and obstacles. And having a tradition that helps us understand what those are is so very, very helpful. I hope that answers your question and I didn't get off topic too much.
No, it answers, and it raises many other questions also, as for example, the healing process, how the healing process takes place, for example, in the life of someone who is deeply traumatized by some of the experiences you describe it. And could you?
Of course. You know, it's very different to work with a child than it is with an older adolescent or an adult. With children, I'm trained as a play therapist. And so with children, they play out their trauma. Because play is their language. Play is their language. They don't have the ability to sit down in a chair and say, well, I was traumatized because this and this and this, but they play it out. And so giving them the opportunity without judgment, without fear, with just freedom to play out their experiences. And it's amazing to watch the resiliency and the healing potential that is in each one of us as the child slowly plays through it and eventually comes to a place where they rework, they replay, they change their manner of play until they have clearly worked through it. For instance, I had a little girl that I worked with for quite a long time, and she would come into the playroom every week. And we had a winged horse in the playroom called Pegasus. She called it Pegasus. And the first thing she would do would be to grab Pegasus. And then she would grab a little plastic mama animal and baby animal. And she would have, and a bad guy. There was always a bad guy. And she would always have the bad guy come and take the baby away from the mother. And Pegasus would have to come and rescue the baby and bring it back to the mom. And she did this time after time after time. Of course, the metaphor there would be, the baby being hurt by the bad guy, being separated from the mom, the abandonment, all of that. And that Pegasus is the healing component. And eventually she changed it so that the bad guy was frightened away by the mom, so that Pegasus didn't have to come in and do any rescuing. And then eventually she changed it to where the baby animal scared off the bad guy, and the bad guy went all the way away. So children are just amazing in their ability to work through that. It becomes a little bit more difficult working with older adolescents and adults because they've layered beliefs into their trauma, believing that they're not lovable, they're not wanted, they're not worthy, they're all of those sort of negative statements that we as human beings can do to one another. And it's a matter of piecing through some of those feelings and thoughts, and we know how powerful thoughts are, and trying to encourage the person to change those thoughts to positive thoughts of, I am a capable, competent adult. I can protect myself. So it's, again, I think from my Theosophical teachings, what I learned was that it's not my job to heal the client. The client has all of those capacities within himself or herself. My job is to either ask the questions and or to provide the environment that is safe enough for the person to do the healing themselves as I walk on that journey with them forward. So I hope that's helpful. That's, if Theosophy is who I am, then counseling is my passion. And truly working with children who have been abused is absolutely my passion. So you got me going on that.
Thank you so much. We are celebrating Vesak today. And then I had selected a quote from Lord Buddha to close our meeting, our interview today, but I think it's suitable to mention it now. He says, open quote, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." Do you think, I think this resumes just what you have said, that we can, you cannot heal, but they have to change their way of thinking and to construct a new narrative, and that will help them in the process of healing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that narrative absolutely has to change. And it's so hard to change our own self-narrative because it's difficult to look at ourselves and see ourselves without all of the mistaken ideas and thoughts that we've just incorporated into ourselves through our entire lifetimes. So yes,
Yeah,
so important.
Barbara, moving back to the Theosophical Society now, could you share with us how your journey in the Theosophical Society up to this point now that you are the president of the TS in America? What types of work you have done before becoming the president of the TS in America, and throughout all these years, an experience, a moment, something that has touched you, inspired you most?
Okay. So even when I was a little girl, my grandmother had Theosophical Society meetings in her home every week. And it was always a big deal in the family, especially to the grandchildren, because she always had good food. As little children, we were not allowed into the meeting because we couldn't sit still and we wouldn't be quiet. But I remember the first time I was finally allowed to be in a meeting. I was probably about 10 years old, and I was so proud to be able to sit in that local TS meeting. I, of course, was active. I attended those meetings. As a teenager, my grandmother had classes for teenagers, so my friends and I went once a week to her house, and she taught us Theosophy. When I moved away from home and went to college, I started attending the TS group in another city in Louisiana. And before I left, my grandmother said, well, you might need to join the Theosophical Society to be able to go to their meetings. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you are not a member yet. I didn't realize it. I thought I was. So that's when I joined the society and made it official. I went to work at our national headquarters in the United States, called Alcott, after our president founder. And I worked there off and on for 6 years. Dora Kuntz was the national president at that time. When I left there, I went to the Crotona Institute of Theosophy in Ojai, California, and I was on staff and worked there for 4 years. So for about 10 years, in most of my 20s, I was working daily for the Theosophical Society. During that time, I had both of my sons. One was born while we were at Alcott, the other was born while we were at Crotona. So they have their toes in the Theosophical Society. When I left working for the society full time and became, a teacher and then a counselor, I continued to, participate in the local meetings, hold local offices, worked at that time in the Gulf Coast Federation that we had. I became at some point a director for the national board, on the National Board of Directors for the Central District in the United States, held the position of vice president, and then now the opportunity to be president, something I never anticipated doing. But when it finally came down to it, I realized that my work in schools, in education, and in nonprofits, as well as the TSA throughout the years, had provided me with a grounding of information that could be helpful as president of the society. It was never in my plans to move back to Northern Illinois, being from the southern part of the United States. But it's not about, again, it's not about me. It's about the society and about how each of us can best serve, not just the society, but what the society was established for, which is serving humanity. And this felt like a way, or the best way, that I could provide that service at that point in time. Even after my presidency is over, I fully expect to continue to work as much as possible for the Theosophical Society in America, and to serve humanity the best that I can. What has touched and inspired me the most, I think, again, the people, the dedication of staff members back in the late 70s and 80s, and again, in the today, and all through time. I think their dedication and their willingness to serve a cause that is much greater than they are. I think that inspires me and touches my heart so deeply.
I think it's so important that you mention, serving a greater cause for humanity. The first object of the Theosophical Society is universal brotherhood.
Yes.
And that both Blavatsky and Olcott, they have worked a lot trying to promote inter-religious dialogues. For example, Blavatsky in the Lucifer magazine, she was raising her voice against racism. The Theosophical Society in the 19th century in New York, and after in India, they were accepting members from any cultural backgrounds. I remember specifically reading Blavatsky commenting how happy they were that they managed to make a meeting at the Theosophical Society in Adyar for the first time in hundreds of years, putting together Brahmins, Buddhists, Muslims, and to talk to each other, to share their ideas. They were so happy and so proud of that. They were raising their voice against racial prejudice and many types of social injustices. So as president of the Theosophical Society in America, how are you promoting diversity and the first object of the Theosophical Society, universal brotherhood?
So actually, I'd like to address this first as a member of the Theosophical Society, because first and foremost, I think that's what I am. I think it's the responsibility of each one of us as members of the Theosophical Society across the world, to work toward, certainly that first object, but to work toward equity, diversity, justice. All of us need to walk this walk. It's very easy to talk about brotherhood and sisterhood, but it's not so easy to actually do it. So I think that it's incumbent upon each one of us to do that. I think we need to be role models for the people around us so that they can say, look at Barbara. She doesn't seem to have any issues there. Or look at Erica. Look how she works for this. And so to be role models so we can pull others into this work that is so core to the Theosophical teachings. I think also, and perhaps this is one of the most difficult aspects, is that each one of us needs to very clearly, honestly, and consistently look inside of ourselves for unconscious bias that exists. Unconscious bias that we've picked up along our human journey in this lifetime, that we're not even really aware of. Obviously, if it's unconscious, but we have to look for it. We have to listen to those thoughts in our heads and think, ooh, where did that come from? Is that a bias that I have? That, I think, is perhaps one of the most important, because we know that thoughts are powerful. We know that thoughts are things. And if I can change my thoughts, if I can become aware of at least some of my unconscious bias, then that is making a difference in the world. Now, as president, I have a bit more of a formal role. So I think I need to do all of those things above, plus lots more. But I think as president of the Theosophical Society in America, I think that it's important that we focus on the unity of all life in every aspect of our outreach. We are trying to share the Theosophical teachings. You know, the TSA is through our outreach, just as you are in the European School. And so focusing or making sure that all of the programs have some aspect of that unity of all life in them. Certainly encouraging that inter-religious, inter-tradition dialogue in our programming is essential. We do share programs by Hindus, by Buddhists, by Native Americans, from all religions. Once I start naming, then I start forgetting, leaving people out, and I don't want to do that. But having a platform that is open to hearing from all, and then having other programs that can pull and tie those pieces together so that we can find that core message that runs through all traditions. And I do think that it is important for the Theosophical Society in America, and for me as the president, to put out statements when appropriate. Certainly remembering that members have freedom of thought, balancing that freedom with the first object. You know, talking about systemic injustice, not just in the United States, but across the world. Talking about homelessness and food insufficiency, wars, anger, violence, talking about those and making sure that the message is out there. We can't make someone listen, but we can certainly provide a message that is there to be found if someone is looking. Diversity is who we are. And I think because so many of us joined the Theosophical Society and are so familiar with our first object of creating this nucleus without any distinctions, that we may forget that we are still human, still have unconscious bias, may unconsciously not recognize systemic injustice. Because we say, well, I don't have any prejudices. I don't care what religion or ethnicity or race or that someone comes from. I love everyone. I support humanity. But yet, when something happens, when someone of a different race or a different tradition or some other difference, whatever it is, does something, that unconscious bias can just bubble up, and we have to pay attention to that. I think that is our true work, is that inner work that we do for ourselves in terms of true acceptance of the unity of all life.
So I think it comes down to the process. It's like a dynamic process of self-knowledge in which we are all the time aware of our thoughts and our actions, trying to tackle possible unconscious bias, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It is, I think that a year ago, after the murder of George Floyd in the United States, I went to a demonstration in this little small southern town. And because I felt that it was so important to be there, to be a voice in the group that says systemic injustice is not acceptable. And yet on the way to this protest, I wondered, What if it becomes violent? What am I going to do? And that is unconscious bias to some degree, equating protests over the death of a Black man with potential violence. Again, it is so hard to look at, but so essential for us. So essential.
Yeah, well, that's very, very difficult, and I think it's a task for all of us because there are different kind of bias we are unaware, and they are not related only to cultural differences, isn't it? But
That's
to many
right.
other things in our lives, even things we are very accommodated within our thoughts, our way of living, and anything that may challenge that, it may
Yes.
raise a reaction. And thank you so much for sharing this experience you had, into going to this protest, and the thoughts that were coming. Oh, if there is violence, and I think that we all somehow go through this process.
Yes,
Yes.
we do. We're humans. It's just part of this journey.
Yes, we are. Now, changing a little subject, Barbara, could you share with us what have you been doing during the pandemic, apart from your work for the Theosophical Society? Um, could you share a bit about Barbara? What are her hobbies? What she likes doing? What you were doing when you were home? I mean, are you a good cook like Tim Boyd? or so tell a bit about yourself to us a minute.
Okay, so when the pandemic hit last spring in March of 2020, and we closed our national headquarters for 2 weeks, I thought, and I talked over with senior staff, what I should do. And they said, you have some underlying conditions. You probably should go home so that you are near your doctors. And so I thought, okay. So I packed for 2 weeks and I drove home. And I have been here ever since with 2 weeks worth of clothing. I have eventually added to it. But so during this time, I have spent a lot of time with my sister. She lives next door. We, if I got sick, she would take care of me. If she got sick, I would be taking care of her. So, and we were both home and quarantined, and she in her house and I in my house. And so she and I spent a great deal of time together. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to spend the time with her. We live in the country. So I have had the opportunity to spend a good bit of time in nature. It is the southern part of the United States, so it is significantly warmer here. So even all winter long, I was able to be outside and working in the yard and taking walks and being outside with my dogs. I have 2 little rescue dachshunds that follow me everywhere. And so we've spent a great deal of time together, cuddling on the sofa or in the recliner. I've done a lot of reading. I love to read. I am going to admit this, I suppose, to the world, but I love to also read non-theosophical books. I love to read fiction. I love historical fiction. And so I have read, my Kindle said to me, flashed me a message the other day that said, you've read for 147 weeks in a row. So obviously I'm spending a good bit of time reading. Certainly spending time in meditation and contemplation has been when things start to become stressful. that is, I find very relaxing. Sitting outside watching the sunset and meditating during that time. I think that the other thing is that, of course, since I've been vaccinated, but even before that, spending time with my grandchildren, having the opportunity to carefully be with them, getting them to wash their hands isn't always easy, but just spending time with them. I think my family is what nourishes my soul more than anything else. And so having that opportunity when I didn't expect to have it has been joyous in the extreme. So, so it's I've kept busy in many ways. So
That's very nice. Well, I must say that Blavatsky was publishing fiction in Lucifer.
yes.
Yeah, she would publish installments every issue of Lucifer magazine. While Blavatsky was the editor, she would include a work of fiction. And she believes that fiction was the heart and the pulse of people. And she considered it very important. So fiction is also, and it can be also, a very theosophical, let's say, reading. Yeah.
Thank you. I needed that because sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not reading the
No.
theosophical literature and thinking, oh, you're wasting your time. But it is actually a way to sort of escape into another world for a while.
I'm not quite sure why fiction theosophists they stopped publishing fiction, but they were doing it in the 19th century. Now, Barbara, could you share with us something very important? Because we all have challenges in our lives and we go through a lot of disappointments also. So how do you deal with challenges and disappointments?
Yeah. I agree with you. Very, very few, if any of us, get out of here without those challenges and disappointments, some larger than others. When I come face to face with them, notice I said when, not if, I recognize first, or I try to recognize first that I'm human and that whatever I'm feeling is okay, whether it's sadness or disappointment or frustration, sometimes even anger. But I try very hard not to hold on to those feelings. I try to recognize them, see what I'm feeling, and then hopefully let go. I'm not always successful. Sometimes it's easier than others. And then what I try to do once I've recognized what's going on is to maybe sit down and meditate on what's happening or meditate on calming myself so that the feelings can be dispersed and allowed to float away. And then I try very hard to look at what's going on inside of myself. What is being pushed? What's causing me to feel these feelings? What's causing me to feel challenged or frustrated? What's causing me to feel angry? What's causing me to feel like something needs to change? Because if I can find out what's going on inside of me, then I can more easily address the situation. So if my challenge, for instance, a little tiny challenge is someone gets ahead of me in traffic and they're going very slowly and I can't get around them, then I start getting frustrated. And so I'm not going to meditate in the car, but if I can sort of think inside of myself, why are you so frustrated? What's causing you to be frustrated about going slow? Then I can go backwards and sort of unwind whatever message that is. I have to get home to do such and such. I am in a hurry because of this reason. And then I stop. I can put that into perspective. What difference is 5 minutes going to make, or 15 minutes going to make? What is time anyway? Not that I really go to that depth all of the time, but I could, because then I'm starting to understand. And once I understand that it's just because I want to get home more quickly, because I want to get the dishes washed more quickly, then I can let go of it and just relax. I think, with those bigger challenges that come to us, many, many years ago in this incarnation, but I was quite young, in my teens, I decided that I wanted to face every challenge and work my way through it so that I didn't have to do it again in my next lifetime. Which kind of seems maybe a little selfish, but I know that these big challenges are here for me to learn. And I believe with all of my heart that if I don't learn from them, they're going to come back to me, either later in this life or in the next life or somewhere in the future. And I'd just as soon learn them now and move on. So I think that is another really strong motivator for me when things are especially difficult. So, is that helpful?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And Barbara, what do you think? I know that this may be a difficult question or easy. I do not know, but what do you think is the most significant contribution of the Theosophical movement for the modern world?
I think we have so much to give the modern world. Not only do the Theosophical teachings explain how to deal with things, they explain the why for me. They give the reason and the cause. But to be more definitive, the things that we see this is, again, my perspective, the things that we see in the world today, the suffering, the food insufficiency, homelessness, anger, violence, war, inequality, injustice. We could just go on and on with that. I think they're symptoms. And we know that, if the physical body has symptoms, we have to do more than just treat the symptoms. We have to find the cause and eradicate the cause. And then the symptoms will disappear on their own. For me, the cause of this suffering is lack of understanding or lack of awareness of the unity of all life at its deepest level. And that's what we have to share. Because once humanity, or the bulk of humanity, begins to become aware that we are all united, that we are all one, then we are starting to address the cause. And the symptoms will disappear. We are not going to commit war or a crime or anger or whatever on another person when we know that that is doing it to every other person, our families, our friends, and ourselves. The world will change once we address the cause. And in my mind, the Theosophical Society is in a perfect position to address that. Unity of all life is one of the primary teachings of Theosophy. And it is a major concept that we have to share with the world.
I couldn't agree more with you. You know, I think the unity of life, I think it's perhaps the most important teaching. It's the very core of Theosophy. And it moves us from anthropocentrism into a state of consciousness that everything around us is alive and needs to be respected and change really the way that we see things. So yes, I agree with you, Barbara, that awareness of unity of life is probably the most important work that the Theosophical movement should be and is doing today, you know. And now, as you know, Barbara, there are many people that they are seeking inspiration, spirituality, something that may lead them to an spiritual awakening, to enlightenment. Many of these seekers, they become very disappointed in their journey because they very often project onto others expectations that are not compatible with reality. How difficult is, in your opinion, for someone to realize, to understand that they need to become what they seek?
I think that is one of our primary tasks as human beings. And I think it is probably one of the most difficult ones we face. Looking to ourselves for answers rather than looking to some external source, which is most likely another human being who is fallible in and of themselves. Looking inside of ourselves and making changes from that perspective is so difficult. It would be so much easier if somebody would just say to us, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and then you are enlightened. But that, as we know, is not the answer. And I think that's why so many people, they come to the Theosophical Society looking for answers, but then when they find out that it's hard work, that there is no easy 1, 2, 3 solution, they may bounce off unless they're really ready to do the work. Listening to ourselves, looking at ourselves, trusting our spiritual intuition, that inner voice within, and listening, following it, is so difficult. I think the next difficult part of that challenge is that once we do hear it, we do listen to it, we do trust it, then we have to make this physical vehicle make the necessary changes. And it's so hard to do that because the personality likes what it's doing. It doesn't want to change its thoughts or the way it experiences emotions or the way it lives physically in the world. So I think this is one of our most difficult challenges, not looking to someone else as the teacher. Even Blavatsky warned us about that. We've been warned from the beginning of the Theosophical movement to listen to ourselves and not to authorities. But beyond listening, we have to implement those changes. And I guess that's why it takes lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, because it is so very difficult to do, but not impossible. We are promised, we are told, we will get there. We will get there, but we must continue to try.